He slammed Andrew Cuomo over New York's COVID-19 nursing home deaths. He also once warned Donald Trump could drive the GOP over the cliff. He's the former Republican Governor George Pataki of New York. He helped that state through the devastating aftermath of September 11th. He's here for a one-on-one, including what he calls America's Great Divide and whether it can be bridged. Thanks. Good seeing you again, Governor.
Larry, nice seeing you again. Good being on with you. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right. As the COVID-19 death toll nears 100,000, I think it broke it, the transition for greatness has started ahead of schedule. Trump says this will be a year of ups and downs, but next year will be one of the best ever. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, this year is a year for enormous downs. First, the horrific loss of life that continues. The pace is slowed, but it's ongoing, and the future on that standpoint is uncertain. But the future economically, at the moment, is one that we all are very concerned about. Over 30 million new people unemployed, small businesses going under, bankruptcies going up. But you know, Larry, I'm an optimist. I believe in this country. I believe in the strength of the American people. And I think that next year we will see a strong economic recovery. I hope it starts right now. And I think it will begin to start now. But over the longer run, beginning hopefully this year, we're going to see America come back stronger than ever.
You were governor during the tragedy of 9/11. How do you respond the way they handle this to the way you handle that?
You know, Larry, it's disappointing that we don't see the cooperation at all levels of government we had on September 11th. You mentioned my book, Beyond the Great Divide, and I tell the story in that book of the afternoon of September 11th when Rudy Giuliani gave me a call and said that he had relocated his emergency center, command center, and all his commissioners with himself to a new place in Lower Manhattan. I thought for a minute, and then I said, Rudy, I'll be right there. And I brought all my key commissioners and players, and that afternoon, September 11th, we were all in the same room at the same table, city, state, and federal. And we were like that for months after September 11th. So we didn't have the city saying one thing, the state saying something else, the federal government saying a third thing. We had a seamless recovery. And you look now and you see the governor of New York and the mayor of New York don't even seem to be talking to each other. One will say the schools are already closed, and the other will say, hey, wait a second, not so fast. I know Cuomo and Trump have met, but it certainly doesn't seem like they're communicating in a cooperative way. So it's just disappointing to me that the divide that we saw before the COVID virus doesn't seem to have really closed the way it should have in the face of this national emergency.
Frankly, though, isn't the pandemic and 9/11 apples and oranges?
In many ways, they are. The pandemic is global. It's certainly national. And September 11th was geographically narrowly confined. Although we had, for a few weeks, we had an enormous economic uncertainty across the whole country, but they are different. But Larry, there are ways they're similar. One is the collapse in the economy. We saw in New York State for 3 years after September 11th, a complete collapse in the economy. People wouldn't go to New York. They were afraid to come to New York. The theaters were empty. The hotels were empty. The restaurants had no customers. And it took an enormous effort to bring that back. And what we're going to need now is an enormous effort to bring our economy back. Also on September 11th, we realized that it's not the Hollywood stars or the super athletes who are the heroes. It's ordinary Americans doing their jobs well every single day. September 11th, the police and the firefighters and the EMTs. Today, the healthcare workers, the orderlies, the nurses, the doctors, the people in the grocery stores. So there's a lot of commonality, but they are two different things.
In your new book, Beyond the Great Divide, you look at how Americans seem to come together. Do you expect them to do the same? So far, it's not.
Larry, we have to. And it's not so much a question of do I expect to, because I'm disappointed so far that we have not. Exactly what you said. But there are signs of hope. Like the last stimulus bill, the $4 trillion bill. I'm sure there are things in there the Democrats didn't like. There are things in there the Republicans didn't like. But what they did is say, this is too important. We have to put aside our purity and get the job done. I wish that was the attitude they bring to government every day. I fear that is not the case, but we have to keep pushing for that.
You've been critical of the current governor, Andrew Cuomo, about his handling of the nursing home. What are you criticizing him doing or
You
not
know,
doing?
we all know, Larry, the single greatest comorbidity risk is age. And we know that the frailest of our seniors and the most vulnerable are in nursing homes. So, how could you demand that nursing homes take COVID positive patients among this highly vulnerable group? When they were protesting, they didn't have the ability to isolate or to handle them or to care for them properly. It just made no sense. And as a consequence, we've had, I believe, well over 5,000 nursing home deaths just in New York State. Fortunately, Governor Cuomo reversed that policy. Sadly, it took him 47 days before he reversed that policy. But I was critical, at least now he's acknowledged that the policy had to change, and it has changed.
How do you assess President Trump's handling of it so far?
You know, I wish that I could say he's doing a great job, but I watched a number of the briefings. And yes, the press was just trying to goad him and not get information out of him. But every single time there was a question that upset him, instead of rising above it, that the president should do, he just engaged. And I
Yeah.
think as president, what he should be doing is looking to inspire the American people, bring us together. You know, there are going to be unfair criticisms. That goes with the turf of being a political leader. You have to shrug it off because he's the president of all the Americans. And let's try to bring us together with the right inspired leadership.
He has asserted that he can override governors in many different ways. As a former governor, do you agree with that?
Well, you know, this whole question of the state of emergency, whether it's governors or the president, it was necessary when the virus first hit and the healthcare system was going to be overwhelmed. But there comes a point where a state of emergency becomes a state of autocracy, where one person is telling 20 million people what they can or cannot do. And I think we're close to that point. I don't believe legally and constitutionally the president can tell a governor, you can't suggest X or Y to a state or demand X or Y to a state. I don't think the president has that authority. But then I question whether or not, for an extended period of time, the governor has that authority. But more importantly, Larry, if the president is telling the people of state X, you know, ignore your governor, and the governor is saying, ignore the president, we're going to have chaos. And we have to do better than that. We have to have this communication across partisan divides, doing what is best for the American people, period.
Vice President Joe Biden, who will be running against President Trump, says that the president is politicizing the mask issue and stoking deaths. What do you make of this mask question?
You know, it's. I don't fault any individual, unlike Vice President Biden, because for the longest time the CDC. You know, it's. I don't fault any individual, unlike Vice President Biden, because for the longest time the CDC was telling us masks don't have any impact. Don't worry about wearing a mask. And then they did a 180 and said, oh, wear masks. Right now, if there's appropriate social distancing, particularly outside, the question of whether or not they're necessary, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that science knows the answer to that. But personally, it just makes sense from a prudence standpoint and to protect others to wear a mask. When I'm out in any public setting where I'll be with other people, I wear a mask, and it's not for a political statement. It's simply to protect others' lives.
So do I. Back in 2011, you launched a group called No American Debt to focus on America's red ink problem. Well, this was before COVID-19. How do you think we're doing?
Yeah, that's like asking the captain of the Titanic before the iceberg how we're doing. But, you know, these are exceptional times. In our lifetimes, we've never seen the national economy shut down completely. We've never seen 300 plus million people essentially under lockdown, except for essential workers. So they require extraordinary effort. So I don't fault the Fed for its expansion of the monetary supply, which I think has been critical, and I think they've done well with that. And I don't fault the president and Congress for for the $4.2 trillion stimulus. We need that. We need to help those who are unemployed. We need to help the small businesses that have no revenue. We need to help industries like the aviation industry where no one's flying. The point is to come back, and to come back as quickly as possible. And it requires extraordinary measures. And for the moment, you just have to set aside the sad fact that we're spending trillions more than we have.
Put on your reporter's hat for me, and you've always been an objective guy. Who's going to win in November?
I think, Larry, that depends on what happens with the virus and the economy. And you don't have to be a brain surgeon to say what I'm going to say. But if, as the opening up continues of the country, if there is a spike in the need for a second lockdown, then I think the odds of President Trump winning go way, way down below 50%. If, on the other hand, the opening up is successful, we don't have that spike in a second shutdown, and the economy starts showing signs that it's really coming back, then I think the odds are better than 50-50 that President Trump wins. So, Larry, you know this game as well as anyone in America. Who would have predicted 3 months ago that the issue would be the handling of a virus by the White House? And we have more than 3 months to go. Today, tomorrow, the next week, the next month, some event might happen that completely changes the landscape. So I think anybody who says they know who's going to win today hasn't seen what you and I have seen over the years.
Yeah, you're right. What do you make of his attack on mail-in ballots?
I think that's a state issue. And I understand the potential for fraud. I've seen those pictures of an apartment house with a stack of ballots, a dozen or more ballots addressed to different people just sitting in the lobby that anybody could pick up and fill out. And I have no doubt that happens. But some states have had mail-in ballots for some time. I think the state of Washington, for example, and it doesn't seem to have been. There doesn't seem to have been massive fraud. I personally think that people should go vote, unless they're sick or disabled or out of the country or unable to vote. I think voting is something that is a right that we should take seriously enough that we'll make the effort to go there. So I strongly believe that states should say, if you're healthy and if you're available, you go to the polls to vote. But I don't think the federal government should take action if a state in our republic of 50 different states decides to choose a different path.
Governor, so good seeing you again. You're looking in great shape. Great to have you with us.
Larry, good to see you. Always great to be on. Keep fighting. You're a national treasure. Stay well.